we have previously had club members, visitors joining from overseas, our virtual meetings. But I believe today is the first time when we actually have a presenter presenting from overseas. Casper is in Portugal and is connecting to us, across oceans, but science and the quest for knowledge that we all have knows no boundaries. So thank you so much, Casper, for taking time from your vacation for us. But of course, we are your club as well. Casper is a webmaster of the club, helped us on many occasions as we were transitioning from older technology to newer type of technology over the years. Casper has his own web managing company, Plethora Design, and in spite of that, he is helping this club and I believe other clubs in the area with all the related needs. So thank you so much for that. Casper is also not a first-time presenter to this club. We have heard his presentations on his travels to Russia and Madagascar and Myanmar, I recall. Today's presentation is different and slightly different for a typical presentation to the club. We are moving into the area of fossils, which is related to mineralogy and of course important for geological identification of rock and the timing of the rock in which some of the minerals that we are collecting may be found. Trilobites, that is the topic of Casper presentation today, is an especially fascinating fossil because it occurred and lived for such a long period of time, for I believe 250 million years, but Casper may correct me if I'm wrong.
That's about right.
I believe it's going to be a fascinating presentation. So with that, Casper, all yours.
Well, thank you, Yuri, and thanks everybody for being here. It's good to see everybody virtually. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Yes.
Yes, it's perfect. Just the presentation itself. Very well. Thank you.
Okay. Initial image there, that's sort of your typical Devonian seafloor, which is the kind of area that I tend to collect. I'll start with just some basics. What are trilobites? They're extinct arthropods. They're in the phylum of arthropods, and why are they important to geology? And that is what you already mentioned, Yuri, and that is that they can be used for dating, because trilobites were so abundant. They occurred in many different strata, and if you find a particular species with a particular morphology in a certain layer, that layer is a certain age, and it can be used for dating other rocks. So for that reason, a lot of geology departments have trilobite collections where you can pull open a drawer and pick out a trilobite, and it'll tell you, oh, that's from such and such a time frame, and use that to reference other rocks that you find in that same area. So that's kind of the excuse for why I want to talk about trilobites, but that's not the reason. I just like trilobites. So they existed longer than the non-avian dinosaurs, possibly as far back as 700 million years ago. There was possibly a common trilobite fauna existing prior to the tectonic breakup of the supercontinent Pannotia between 600 and 550 million years ago. That was centered on the South Pole, as you can see in the graphic. And they made it through the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, all the way through the end of the Permian. That's a very long time. So in this graphic, there's just kind of an overview of the different phyla. And there are many different kinds of trilobites, tons of different morphologies, shapes, sizes, adaptations. There's one highlighted here in yellow. I think it's highlighted because there's no real knowledge about where they came from, this particular phylum. It also happens to be one of the most abundant phyla in terms of trilobite fossils. All the ones that I collect are from this particular phylum, but the relationship between this one and older species is a little bit fuzzy. This gives you a bit of an idea that the protids are the ones that kind of survived to the end of the Permian, and then the Permian kind of did them in. That was the end of that. It's a big collection. And I just want to start off also with a bit of a picture of what it would have looked like, what their habitat would have looked like. And personally, my collecting focus is on the Devonian era. And so that's what these pictures are. And some of these creatures still exist, but not the trilobite. This kind of thing would look familiar even now, but these guys don't exist anymore. Here's a different species, this spiny late Devonian species. They were mostly bottom dwellers, and there's debate about some of them had eye adaptations that might have meant that they were predators, but mostly they consumed things off the ocean floor. And a couple more vignettes here. On the left, here's a photo of a, sorry, I have some technical issues here, hang on a minute. Okay, a Wallyserops trifurcatus, basically a fork trilobite. It's got this kind of fork coming off of its head. And then this one down here is a Chimera that has spines off of the eyes and off the body. Just to kind of give an idea of the variety, the huge variety. And on the right, a completely different kind of trilobite, the Bumastus. All the same basic species. I'll talk about morphology, and towards the end, sort of the second half of the presentation will be more collecting focused. I'm doing a little bit of sciencey stuff, but not a lot because I'm not a paleontologist. I'm a field collector. So the word trilobite is because they're made of 3 lobes. And I used to think that it was because they've got the kind of the head section and then the body section and then the tail section, but apparently it means vertically 3 lobes, left, center, right. And I guess sort of secondarily also the head, the cephalon, the body, thorax, and then the pygidium. And so most of them had eyes and some had none at all. And towards the later evolutionary period of trilobites, many had spines because by that time fish had come around, and to counteract predation from fish, they grew spines. Some of them even had spines growing off their eyes. I should also add that their bodies, the exoskeleton was made of calcite. Their eyes were made of calcite, and they shed, or they molted many times. I'll get to that. This photo here. So particularly on the right, you can see the stages of molting. These are engravings from the 19th century. And top left is the first growth stage, the nymph stage. There are certain species of trilobites that actually only ever look like that growth stage. But because of the molting process happens so many times, their exoskeletons litter the ocean floor. One trilobite might produce 20 pieces of trilobite carapace as fossil, but only maybe once out of 20 times would be a complete trilobite with the head and the body and tail intact. So most of the fossil record is from the molting process. So to get just a little bit into the morphology, I talked about the stuff on the left already. And the head has a further breakdown of the glabella in the middle. It kind of speaks for itself. The segments are called pleura, and they're interlocking. And some species had a whole bunch, some had just one or two. It kind of depends on the particular species. And the number of pleura can be a useful way to identify which species you've found. And then when we talk about the tails, there's variation in that as well, where on the left, you'll see a teeny tiny tail. And then the next one here is a bit bigger, all the way up to a really large tail on the right. To me, the most interesting part of their morphology is their eyes. Trilobites had their first complex eyes, and they were comprised of these many different facets of calcite. And it ranges from holochrole on the left, meaning up to 15,000 separate trilobite, separate lenses, and their brains somehow combined those into a single picture. Schizochrole, that's up to 700 lenses per eye. And then abathochrole, and that's fewer lenses, maybe up to 70. And the great thing about those is they get preserved because they started off as calcite, and if they're shielded from acid rain or other fluids that contain acid, they'll be like they were originally. There have actually been, there was an experiment somebody did. I tried to find a photo. I read this once and I just haven't been able to find the photo, where they took a trilobite eye and they took a photo of the FBI building across the street from their office using camera obscura technique. And it actually produced a photo using 400 million year old trilobite eyes. Still functional. It's just amazing. But I can't find the picture. It's not online and I can't find the book. It's in my house someplace. So in these pictures, you can see two different adaptations. On the left, there's a very tall trilobite eye, about an inch in height. And then on the right, eyes on stalks, presumably because this is a trilobite that lived in the mud. So the eyes would kind of stick out of the mud. That's the idea. So a couple more examples here. The one on the left had thousands of tiny lenses, just quite a lot, and they wrapped around. So rather than being a single eye, there were two eyes that had merged into a single giant eye with a bunch of tiny lenses, which is pretty unusual. And then on the right is, that's from Morocco. And those eyes have shades. And the thinking, from what I've read about it anyway, is that it's to protect the eyes from light coming from above, because they live near the bottom, and that would help them see better it's like wearing a hat or wearing shades. That's kind of what it's for. And then on the left is a similar species that has eyes that have merged into a single eye, the Cyclops trilobite. Pretty bizarre looking thing. And then on the right, another extreme one, late Devonian, meaning I think that would be about 400 million years ago, that only had 3 to 4 lenses per eye. I mean, you can literally count them on one hand right there. I don't know if you can see my cursor.
Yeah, yes, we can see it.
And just to say, if anyone has questions, I can't actually watch the chat while I'm presenting, so I would say just speak up, and I'm happy to entertain questions. I wanted to talk about the eyes just a bit more. I came across this graphic a while back during the Enlightenment, when microscopes were being produced for the first time. Christian Huygens and René Descartes both came up with lenses of their own with experimentation. And turns out that the Huygens lens matches the Trilobite lens, the Crozonapsis lens, pretty closely. And the Descartes one matches the Dalmatinina fairly closely. I thought that was pretty neat. So onto the internal anatomy. Fairly simple creatures. They ate stuff and it moved through their system, and they had legs. They had a brain, not very big, and they carried eggs. The females carried eggs on top of the head, which I'll get to in a bit more detail. I should also mention there's not a lot of soft body preservation in the fossil record, but there are some places in China and the Burgess Shell in Canada. So here, I wanted to talk about the mouth a little bit. So their mouth was underneath. It's called the hypostome, and it's often not preserved. I've never found one, but here are some examples. This mostly goes to show that, they're bottom feeders primarily, at least for the ones that we have, that there are fossils for. I mentioned trilobite eggs, and there are not many examples of this, but in New York in 2017, there was a fossil found of trilobite eggs, and you can see a detail of that here. Pretty good soft body preservation on that, because it's got the legs and antennae, it seems, and an eggs as well. So they breed similarly to other arthropods, basically. Now, in terms of size, they grew up to 30 inches in size in places. So in Portugal, actually, the largest trilobites have been found in Portugal. And I happen to be there right now. I didn't really come here for trilobites, but now that I'm here, I'm going to go find that museum about an hour north of here in Porto. There's a Trilobite Museum. And in that same area, there's a UNESCO World Heritage area, a geological park. And that's where these come from. But 30 inches in size, I think that's respectable. So as far as localities, where are they found? They're found almost everywhere. but there are some famous places shown on the map here. Morocco produces prodigious amounts of trilobites. There's just so much there. Well, I'll start with that, but I actually went there. I went on a trip with Minda in 2012, and we had a 30-minute trilobite collecting pit stop. I didn't find much, but this was the spot. I did find 1 or 2 little trilobites, and that was just in 30 minutes. Just kind of goes to show how much is there. It also helps that there's no trees or shrubberies or anything. It's just exposed rock most of the place. You're probably all familiar with scenes like this, these massive die-off plates of trilobites from there. Pretty astounding. Right, it's not all trilobites. That's a dinosaur footprint, and those are crinoids. But anyway, so another spot is in Penn-Dixie in upstate New York. I went there maybe 2 years ago, and it's Devonian, meaning 350 to 400 million years ago, something like that. It's a pretty good spot. It's a fee dig locality. I think an annual pass might be $30 a year. It's a very, very hard shale. The trilobites that come out of there are up to a couple inches in size. The photo on the right is, I think it's pretty typical for the good finds. I haven't found anything like that myself. That's not mine. The photo on the right also hasn't, that specimen hasn't really been prepped. They get much nicer than that. It's, oh yeah, here's some details on this. This is a while ago now, it was almost 2 years ago. So $10 admission and annual membership is $30, including after hours. And in that same vicinity, there's a place called 18 Mile Creek I haven't been to. It used to be pretty good collecting, apparently, for pyritized trilobites. But when I asked around, everyone said it's picked over and you shouldn't go there, and I didn't have time anyway. So there are 2 species found at Penn-Dixie. There's the Eldridgeops rana. This is one that I found. I haven't prepped it yet. I don't know if I ever will because the rock is so hard. It's probably complete though. And there's another species there called Greenops, but I don't have any of those. So another popular spot is in Utah, in Delta, Utah. And that's a fee dig locality that I haven't been to and I want to. And this is sandstone. You pay half day 42, full day $70. And it's basically split sandstone until you find something. And it's a pretty good variety in terms of the species. So if you're ever out in that area, it's worth checking out. I have yet to convince my wife to make it a family trip. I'll just have to do it on my own. So then there's this Woolcot rust quarry. I don't think this is accessible. It's accessible to scientific organizations, I believe. And you can see with the picture on the left, you can see why. This has undergone a lot of preparation. Those spines, this has all been done with air abrasion to remove what looks like sandstone. And then you see on the right the different species that are also found there. That would be a dream location for me. I don't think I'll get to collect there. Here's some more from there. There's a spot in West Virginia where you can find teeny little fossils like this the one on the left, but I'm talking, you know, less than a quarter inch in size. And a bit more of the same. You'll see that some of these have bumps on their exoskeleton, like the one on the far right. There's not really any evidence as to what those were for, but the thinking is, if you compare it to other arthropods, they were probably kind of hair-like structures or something like that. It would make sense. A sensory kind of thing. So another big locality is the Burgess Shale, which is famous for the Cambrian explosion fossils and a lot of soft body preservation. The Smithsonian has 65,000 specimens, representing about 127 species. You can take guided tours there. There's no collecting allowed, as far as I know. I haven't been. It's on my bucket list. Can't do a presentation like this and not mention it. The world's most important animal fossils come from there, according to Stephen Jay Gould, so it must be good. Then there's the Latham Shale in California. It's from the Lower Cambrian, 518 million years ago. To me, what's amazing about that is that multicellular life emerged about 600 million years ago. I think that's been pushed back recently, though. I think that's been pushed back to 650 million years ago in the last month or so. But still, to go from multicellular to what you see on the screen in the span of you know, a mere 80 million years is astounding to me. When I look at these, I wonder why the spines. I don't think they're anti-predator. Maybe it's to help them swim or help them settle in the mud or something. So another location, and this one is not one of the main locations, but it's my main location. I have collected at a private spot in West Virginia for the last 10 years or so, in Capon Bridge, the Capon Bridge area. It's just over the border from Virginia, around 50. And you'll see here in this detail, it's in Hampshire County, and it consists of the Marcellus Shale and Mohantango mudstone or siltstone, depending how you want to refer to it. There's two kinds of rock, basically. There's the hard shale, which is kind of hard to pick apart, and then there's the mudstone that breaks apart if you so much as look at it. And they have their pluses and minuses. So here's a little snapshot of the site. The whole area that I work is 40, maybe 40 feet by 20 feet, something like that. Where you see this boulder here, that used to be up here. And there used to be two more of them. In the past 10 years, you know, I and my buddies have seen to destroying it into rubble and getting trilobites out of it. There's just one boulder remaining. There's a shelf of, actually, why did I say need more? That is not accurate. Hang on. Ignore what that says there. It's not the Needmore Formation. It's Mohantango and Marcellus. By the way, Marcellus is famous for fracking and coal mining. There's a section of rock that runs through there that's maybe a foot deep and 3 feet wide. And I've had pretty good luck getting fossils out of there. But there's only this one exposure that I know of that I have access to. And all this time it's produced. So here's an example of that. This little spot in the middle is a trilobite. There's the head, there's an eye, there's another eye, there's the tail. These boulders tend to have a kind of crust, maybe centimeter thick crust around it. And for whatever reason, that's where a lot of fossils tend to be here at this site. So then it becomes an exercise in how do I get it off the boulder without destroying the specimen. Slides are a bit out of order. Let me go, there we go. This is that same species, the same specimen. It didn't come out in one piece. It came out in two pieces that I glued back together. You can kind of see that here. This hasn't been prepped yet. I ended up using steel brush on it with my my drill, my power drill, and it came out like this. There's a downside to this, which is that a lot of the specimens at this site have calcite crystals coating the outside of the fossil, which is really cool. Steel brush and calcite don't mix. So when I go for this approach, I lose all the calcite sparkles, but I get very good definition. There is no way to reveal it without the steel brush. So I'll move on to this one here. This is the largest one that I found at this site. It came out looking like what you see at the top left, heavily fortified with a couple different kinds of super glue. And bottom left is mid preparation. And then top right is its current state. Although I think I might actually do a little bit more to it. No more abrasion, but maybe a little bit of coating. As far as the species goes, I've posted this on some places online and gotten some reactions from people who said they didn't realize that species gets that big. I mean, there are certainly trilobites way bigger than this, but for the species, it's very it's about at the top of the size. Unfortunately, it came out in two pieces. I was there with a group. I had gone out there alone, and I saw a group of people collecting along the side of the road. So I chatted with them, and I said, "Hey, come with me. I know a spot." And one of the guys found an impression, the impression to this one, and then he had to leave. But I watched where he found it. So I spent the next hour turning over every rock bigger than what he found, and I found the positive, which is the only time that's ever worked for me. And so later I talked to him about getting the negative, and he was very gracious, and he gave me the negative too, because the negative had part of the eye over here. But you see there's a kind of piece missing here as well. There's nothing I can do about that, but it's pretty much complete. So a couple more examples from this spot. From top to bottom, that's just the body with no head, before and after. And there's a head before and after. And here is Sonia, my stepdaughter. What she's pointing at is an enrolled trilobite. You can barely make it out. There's a close-up. You can see the segments there. I was leaning up against the boulder, and she said, "Hey, well, isn't that something?" And she was right. And this is what it is. So this is one of those cases where it's not a molt because it's got the head and the body and the tail all together. Maybe there was a storm and silt washed over it and it was trying to protect itself and curled up. So here's a display of some of fossils from that site.
Video off.
It's not everything.
But he's showing trilobites. Just showing them. He
What's that?
discussed the anatomy of trilobites in more detail than I knew existed. And now he's into showing them. It's the specialty of his.
John, I don't think you know you're not on mute.
Sorry.
So I have a kind of reference. This is becoming sort of a reference collection for the different sizes of, well, the enrolled trilobites. It's not arranged like that right now, but it's kind of cool for me to see sizes from, you know, the smallest of things all the way up to as big as they got. There's a better shot of that. So when I started collecting avidly there, I didn't think I could ever find a complete trilobite. And then a couple of years ago, I found one. And then I started finding more. And then I started being more careful about the areas that I was collecting in, which layer I was focusing on. And that makes a very big difference. Talk a little bit about fossil preparation. So on the right, you'll see air abrasion. That means you use a medium and a pneumatic air compressor. You shoot some kind of sodium bicarbonate or silicon dioxide, some kind of medium at the rock. I use sodium bicarbonate because it's soft, and the rocks that I'm working are pretty soft. So it's a kind of gradual process. And then on the left is a microjack, a tiny little kind of dental tool thing. So I use the microjack first, and just to kind of whittle away at the whatever's encasing the fossil. And for the last ½ millimeter of film or whatever that's on there, I used air abrasion. Basically what this slide says, but I'm not going to go through that. So let's look at some pretty pictures of trilobites. I showed this one earlier. This is the Wallyserops, the Trident trilobite. Nobody knows what that trident is for. Sexual selection, it's not defensive. It doesn't make sense as a defensive item. Probably sexual selection related. I have one of these at home. Not that I collect them myself, but that I purchased. Decranurus monstrosus, that has these kind of ram's horns. There's a lot of these on the market online. Many of them are fake, or made with parts of real ones, and then that have the missing elements filled in with resin. This one's kind of interesting to me. It's quite different looking from a lot of the other ones. The way that the tail has this clear separation from the rest of the body. And then the drotops. There's a couple different species of drotops, but this one is the armored variety. And it's got spikes on top of its eyes. It did not want to get eaten. And on the other end of the spectrum is the agnostus. And you remember when I was saying earlier, I showed the different growth stages, including the nymph stage. This is the adult form of this trilobite, but it looks like the nymph stage of some of those other ones. So a couple different ones here. The harpies on the left, the megastaspis in the middle, and the one on the right I think is really cool. Just a pretty neat mineralization on that. And one on the left is not even the biggest trilobite ever, but it's pretty impressive. And then one of those stalk-eyed trilobites on the right. Most of the specimens of that I've seen come from Russia. So we're coming towards the end of the presentation, so I thought we should talk about what happened. Why don't we have trilobites anymore? Well, they existed for a long time. And they were outlived by the insects and myriapods. I don't even know what myriapods are. But lizards kind of had their start right before trilobites died out. The dinosaurs started when trilobites died, but the non-avian dinosaurs lived about half as long as trilobites did. So 544 million years ago or so, trilobites started. They died out at the Permian extinction 248 million years ago. Or 250 or so million years ago. It killed 95% of life on Earth, lasting about 15 million years. There's some debate about that. Some people think only 200,000 years. It affected the entire planet. And there's ongoing debate about what caused it. It's probably a combination of factors, and it may never be provable. Temperature crises in marine surface waters. This is based on studies of oxygen isotopes, ratios of calcium to magnesium in Permian fossil shell materials, or the alteration of the carbon cycle, again, based on isotopes. Population explosion of methane-producing microbes, which was a thing. Question is, how much did it really impact or cause the Permian extinction? There was also the fact that Pangea became a thing there, which meant that a lot of shallow water marine basins, which is where the trilobites lived, there were these shallow Devonian seas, they got destroyed by the continents running into each other. Not good for the trilobites. However, Pangea was fully assembled by the middle of the Permian, but mass extinctions didn't happen until 15 million years later, so not so sure about that. Comet or meteorite impact? Maybe, no evidence. So we might never know. For anyone interested in collecting fossils in the Mid-Atlantic region, there's a book that's become kind of a Bible for folks like me in this area, and that's Jasper Burns' Fossil Collecting in the Mid-Atlantic States. It has a lot of information about mostly roadside localities, road cuts. And those are a good jumping off point for finding fossils in areas like that. And then these other three are also useful resources. And the link to this presentation is in the chat, so it can be viewed offline after this call for anyone who's interested. And that's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Casper.
Happy to do it.
We can go back, turn on the video so we can see each other and ask any questions you might have.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if you can identify it over the video, but is this a, are you able to see it?
I can see it. It's a pyritized ammonite.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Jurassic, from the time of the dinosaurs. I don't know where did you get it?
I purchased it a long time ago. I'm not sure exactly where. I actually have three. There's also this. Can you see it? It's
Oh,
this
that-
one,
yeah,
but
yeah.
and then if you turn it, you can kind of see the like I don't know if it's the tail. It's really, I really like it because it goes like all around.
Those are really
Not sure.
cool.
And then this was the third one here. And then I think, from what I remember, when I purchased it a long time ago, I don't know if this, I think I was told it was a bone, but I wasn't sure.
Well, I can't tell from that. Probably that looks like bone, a cross section, but I wouldn't be able to tell
Yeah.
you what. But the other ones are definitely pyritized ammonites, and I've seen those kinds from Germany in particular.
Okay. Ammonite. You said pyrrhotite ammonite?
I'll put it in the chat. It's pyritized ammonite. It's basically ammonites that turned into pyrite. You have a mineral that looks like an animal. It's in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks for the presentation. That was great, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Casper, speaking of pyritized, those Herkimer, New York specimens, they look like they might be pyritized.
Some of them are. Yeah, I think I mentioned 18 Mile Creek, and that's famous for pyritized ones. And the ones at Penn-Dixie, some of them can be, but I haven't seen one personally that is. There are, yeah, there's kind of, they have a kind of mythical status, at least to me, because I've never found one going up there.
Yeah, I've never seen a pyritized trilobite.
They do exist in New York, and 18 Mile Creek supposedly has them. And supposedly people will call the cops on you if you try to collect there. So I haven't done that.
Mm.
I believe that Alden also had pyritized ammonites, cephalopods, and trilobites.
Where is that?
Alden, New York.
Alden, New York. That's upstate New York too, right?
Yeah, it's just outside of Buffalo.
Yeah,
It's
that's
outside of
exactly
Buffalo.
that same area, precisely that same area.
Yeah, but here again, that's another one. They'll call the cops on you now, I believe. I don't think there's any collecting in there anymore at all.
That's what I've heard, but you know, people say all kinds of things for different reasons. There's the St. Clair fossil site in Pennsylvania for fern fossils, and those aren't pyritized, but they're pyrrhotite, white fossils on a black shale, and that site's off limits now. At least that's what I've been told.
There's also pretty good fossil collecting in Ohio. You can find some trilobites in Columbus, Ohio, and not far away there's a state park that's on a dam spillway so they went through and exposed the layer that you can publicly collect trilobites. And when I was living in Ohio for a while, it was like a little escape for me. They're tiny, you really can't see them, but they're old.
That's great.
You know, and so I used to go down there and collect trilobites from there. So that was a lot of fun in Ohio. So Ohio is just littered with these things. You know, trilobites in certain areas, but you know, of course, if anybody's looking for any other fossils, Ohio, it was pretty much completely was submerged for a very long time, and a lot of us think that it should be submerged again. But so Ohio is famous for that. But you know, in the show and tell, I do have a little Alrathia kingi that I have had since I was 4 years old.
Oh, wow. That's so
I've
cool.
had this little guy since I was 4 years old. So that's been a little fun little one. But this is like, you know, like I consider, actually it's a really nice specimen, but it's the starter specimen for pretty much my entire collection. This little guy.
Wow.
But you know,
It's a keeper.
the fun part about trilobites is that there's just endless combinations of these things. It's just endless. I love them. So I say thank you, Caspar. I really appreciated this. The trilobite is near and dear to my heart.
I'm glad to hear I'm not a voice in the wilderness.
Bess, did you have a question? I think Bess has a question.
Got two questions. One is, what was the word you used for the rolled up? Was it an enrolled, E-N-R-O-L-L-E-D?
Yes.
Okay, enrolled. Okay, I wasn't quite sure, didn't quite catch it. The other is, other than when you see all kinds of trilobites from Morocco that look all exactly the same, is there any other way that you can tell a fake from a real one?
I'm sorry, I had to rejoin. My Zoom cut out on me. I'm back. To tell a real one from a fake one, it depends.
When you see them, Moroccan ones, you see all kinds of look just exactly the same, like they've been carved and painted and all that sort of stuff. But other than that, how can you tell a real one from a fake one?
It's hard. Well, for some of them, it's hard. So what I've seen that happens a lot is, more often than not, people find what's not a complete specimen. They'll find bits and pieces. You might find 20 different sized individual dead trilobites and pieces of them, and then end up piecing them together and making a complete trilobite out of them over time, or filling in the gaps with resin. So what you want to look for a real one is that it has like if there's a natural crack, if it's a limestone or something and there's a natural crack running through the rock, you want to see that that's also running through the fossil, the trilobite itself. Instead of there's a crack in the matrix, but the crack doesn't run through the fossil, that's likely to be a fake. Impurities like that are a good thing. You want to see that. The other one would be if the matrix, if the base rock is some different looking material than the fossil itself, color-wise. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If the fossil lacks definition, I mean, even just basic definition, just if the segments aren't well defined, it might mean it's just a poor quality cast. It's hard to cast the details like the eyes and things. So what often happens is that people will cast the body and then they'll use real trilobite eyes and add those to that because they can't really fake the eyes. I use UV lights to detect glue. That's not a tell in itself either, because glue is used in real preparation. I mean, preparation is just a part of it.
Look, he said this is from the dinosaur. Okay.
So
These three. Oh, hi.
I just muted everybody. So Casper, you need to unmute again, and anyone else who wants to speak.
okay, I'm back. So I was going to say it's I would like the way that I've done it for myself. I don't buy a lot of trilobites. I mostly collect my own. I buy a few, and the few that I've bought, I based my decision off of knowing the kind of species that I'm buying, knowing the morphology. You know, if something looks out of place or weird, it probably is. If something seems off, I don't go for it. Yeah, I don't know. It's not really a satisfactory answer, I'm afraid.
Well, thanks for a try there, and thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it.
The other thing I learned when I was looking at trilobites is that if it looks too nice and is too inexpensive, it probably is both.
Yeah, I once.
Yeah, and a lot of the Moroccan ones, like this is a little Moroccan one here. I mean, these things are just probably littering the ground there. I mean, there's just, for a lot of these, there's just no reason to make them fake. This is just
There's no
more expensive.
payback. There's no payoff in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are always real. When you see those, they're always real. But it's the really fancy ones that have all the spines. Then you have to really question it. I actually once bought, kind of on a whim. I live in Sterling, and Sterling every year they have Sterling Fest, where they have all these different vendors, and one of them had rocks, and he had a Dicronurus monstrosus with all the spines for $15. Well,
Why not?
that couldn't possibly be real because the real ones go for 1,500 or more, and it wasn't real. It was all resin. I put it on the saw and I cut right through it to see how it was done. And after I cut through it, I could smell the resin. So now every time I shop for these things, I hold the specimen to my nose and I smell for resin. Sometimes I smell it.
That's crazy.
I was gonna
Those
say-
things called mud bugs that I've seen, those are casts.
Mud bugs. I haven't heard that phrase, but they do look like bugs, don't they?
Now, these look like trilobites, but they call them mud bugs. And my guess is that those are cast from mud, but I'm not sure.
Hmm.
I haven't tried putting one in water to see what would happen.
Well, that would be a good first step, water and toothpaste. I was gonna say the first fossil I ever found was in Cincinnati. My parents had family friends there, and they took me fossil collecting. And that was my introduction to fossils. Anyhow.
Casper, I'm really impressed with your collection. I had no idea you were a trilobite collector. You mentioned Stephen Jay Gould. In the museum, we have like once a month, we read a book. A couple months ago, I guess you can't really see. It's my Kindle, but it's too blown out. Oh no, that wasn't the cover. Here's the cover. It's a Wonderful Life, Stephen Jay Gould, on trilobites, Wonderful Life. That's a really, really great book on trilobites. And then another book we read was Ends of the World, extinctions. So you talked about the Permian extinction of the trilobites. The end Permian, basically, it was like a runaway greenhouse effect causing increase in temperature, earth warming, and then Pangaea closed in and closed out the waterways. So that's what I learned in the book on extinctions. Pangaea kind of filled in the shallow waters.
It affected the weather patterns, because once it became this one mass, the clouds couldn't move over that mass, which just added to it.
Yeah, but great topics, trilobites. I mean, I'm a micro mount. I don't have a baby trilobite that I could mount, but great collection. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you list the books in the chat? Somebody was
Sure.
asking to do that. That would be
Yeah,
great.
Stephen Jay Gould, he's very famous. And he talks about Secretary Walcott, because Secretary Walcott was the one who discovered Burgess Hill. And back in the early 1900s, he brought back over 65,000 specimens, by donkey and whatever. And Stephen Jay Gould, his book was 1989. And he kind of put down Secretary Walcott. I don't understand why, but we kind of had a consensus that there was an ego trip going on between Stephen Jay Gould against Walcott. But I'll put those in the chat.
I did the Gould one. I didn't. You can write the second one.
It was really good. It's a very good read. I recommend it.
I'll check it out. There's a book that I read about the Permian extinction called, I think it was called The Great Dying, which is also fascinating.
Okay.
I'll check that.
Comment. About 10, maybe 15 years ago, a student at a geology student at Northern Virginia Community College used trilobite eyes to verify the dating on the Tumbling Run outcrop. which is my favorite outcrop, just north of Strasbourg. Rumor has it she hated the project. It involved dissolving pounds of limestone to get the eyes, and apparently all they had were the eyes. But as you said, Casper, once you've got these parts of the trilobite, you can compare them to known sources and find the year. What she found is that that outcrop had in fact been dated correctly. But this is very local, work done locally on a local outcrop using little bitty parts of trilobites. I'm not aware of any whole trilobites being found there. I suppose there have been.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of that. Whole trilobites are somewhat rare. But you know, the whole trilobites are not that scientifically important anyway. The parts are much more abundant and useful scientifically. You can reconstruct a picture of a whole trilobite from all the parts anyway.
Casper, you had mentioned one of the sites was sandstone that you collected the trilobites in. Would that be a lot easier than the shale?
Yeah, it was more like a mudstone, like almost sandstone, but yeah, it's way softer. I mean, it's so soft, I'll pick a piece up and just kind of crumble it or crunch it in my hand and it comes apart. Which is great if the specimen stays intact, and not so great when it crumbles into a million pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the shale stuff is much harder, and that's the stuff where I'll take a big chunk home and kind of whittle it down with tools at home, because it just takes longer. I'm not going to do that in the sun all day.
Yeah, I was wondering if you found any ones in the mudstone, would they be soft and crumbly compared to the shale where they'd be hard as rock?
The ones in the mudstone are a little harder than the surrounding rock, but not by much, because the carapaces are mineralized. It's calcite, and I'm not sure, sometimes they turn into something else that's a little darker. I'm not sure what the mineral is. But they're just ever so slightly harder. The problem is if there's these natural cracks that run through the mudstone every which way, and they tend to run right through the fossils. So I'll take glue with me to the site, and I'll fill the cracks with glue if I remember to bring my glue, which is not often. More often than not, I just keep the pieces together, you know, in the same pocket or whatever, and then when I get home, I rectify it.
Very good.
Any other questions for Casper? Well, Casper, thank you so much for coming to us, you know, across the ocean and presenting. Thank you.
Yeah.